Hi, you're watching Dover Castle on the Time Team official YouTube channel with me, Tony Robinson. These are the White Cliffs at Dover. These cliffs have repelled the great unwanted for thousands of years. This is the edge of England. Perched on top is Dover Castle, dominating all in its sight. This place was built in the year 1180 by King Henry II as an enormous political gesture. It was the Millennium Dome of its day. Vast, ridiculously expensive, and built to show off the best we could offer. Unlike the Dome, Dover Castle was a success in its day. Now, though, it just looks like any other medieval castle. But that is about to change. English Heritage is restoring it to what it would have looked like when it was first finished. It's a huge, ambitious project, bringing together historians, designers, and around 150 craftsmen. So we have a unique opportunity to travel back in time to see what the 12th century really looked like. On the outside, Dover Castle is big and bold. It makes a huge statement overlooking the English Channel. Building a castle here is a pretty simple idea. It dominates the approach from the sea and is here to defend us. But in reality, the story of the building of this place is far from simple. At its heart is a tale of intrigue, embarrassment, and murder. Dover Castle is one of England's great castles. Its big square keep dominates the landscape as it's done for 800 years. But a team from English Heritage have been making big changes to it over the last 2 years. They've been researching how it would have looked when it was first built. Kit Surrey is part of that team. He's a theatre set designer who takes big empty spaces and creates make-believe worlds. He's a master of the art of illusion, of things not being quite what you might expect.
And this is obviously the King's table.
Yep, the high table.
Kit is meeting today with Ian Dale, a master weaver.
Well, I think the best thing, Ian, is if I just...
This isn't Kit's usual sort of theatre space, it's Dover Castle. And today, he and Ian are preoccupied with how a king might sleep.
Now, the other thing is in the making up of the bed, in that period, nobody slept flat. They all slept sitting up. And the main reason for that being, of course, was that they were afraid that if they did lie flat and fell asleep and the mouths would open, the devil would jump in.
Good heavens.
Dover Castle was built on the orders of King Henry II. In its day, it was top of the range, the most expensive secular building in Europe. Henry was King of England, but he also ruled a large part of France.
He was probably the most powerful ruler in Europe. He's famous as a conqueror. He's famous as the man who was the first English king to rule in Ireland.
He founded an entire dynasty, the Plantagenet dynasty. He created this extraordinary empire across half of France. He conquered Ireland. He introduced new laws to England. He's one of the great kings in English history.
So that's all hunky-dory, I think.
It is, it's going...
This is the core team from English Heritage, thinking about how the castle keep at Dover looked in the 12th century. They're spending £2.5 million in trying to return it to what it would have looked like then.
It's basically about bringing this building, the Great Tower, back to life at the period when it was first built in the 1180s. What was this building for? Why was it built? And what functions did it perform? And the visitor will get a walk-through experience which puts them back into the 12th century.
What makes this building project different is the academic ambition of it. 2 years of research have gone into piecing together what they can discover of the 12th century. This has never been done in this much detail before. This space is the King's Hall. It would have been the most spectacular room in the castle.
This is the place where he would have received important people.
And this is where you're going to start the big show?
This is it. This is where our project really kicks off, and this is where we make the impact, yeah. This whole space is going to be decorated with reproduction wall hangings.
What kind of thing?
Well, at the top, there'll be a continuous strip running right round the whole room, which will be a war scene, and our model is going to be the Norman conquest.
You've got a lot of wall space to do it on, haven't you?
Yeah.
So this is going to be your own Beyer tapestry?
It is indeed.
Next door is the King's bedchamber. This room would have been more than just a bedroom. It's where all the big decisions of state would have been taken. The King even kept his money in here.
The King is travelling round with all his gear, and he has to conduct the business of state.
So there would actually have been sacks of money in there?
Yeah, almost certainly.
Are you going to do that too, in your display?
We're going to have sacks of cash in there, yeah.
The chapel is ordinary looking now, but it too will be transformed. I can't help noticing that there's this rather odd, well-lit room just up those stairs there. What's that all about?
That's Henry's private space, where he would probably have sat to do private business while the service was going on.
Hang on. He sits up here while the service is on. It's a bit rude, really, isn't it?
Well, he was a very busy man. He had lots of things to do, business of state, things like that. So he probably would have watched the service from where you are now while doing that business.
I do see what you mean, actually, because I can see the altar ever so clearly from here, but there could be anybody sitting over there and you wouldn't know. I could just concentrate on chatting to them half the time. The keep is closed to the public. The work is about to begin. These rooms are dull, dark and empty now. Returning them to what they would have looked like is a massive task. This was a palace fit for a king, and King Henry II was a very powerful man. Henry II ruled England for 35 years. He's one of our longest-serving kings. And now, here he lies, next to his wife, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, and at his feet, his son, Richard the Lionheart, another celebrated king. But this isn't England's green and pleasant land. These great English kings are buried here, at the Abbey at Fontainebleau, in the Loire Valley, in France. Henry's buried in France because he was French. Born in Le Mans, Henry grew up in France and died there. But he ruled over us, and Dover Castle still stands 800 years later as a symbol of his power and his authority as King of England. We think of castles that look like this as very English, but this great big square keep, standing guard against invaders from the continent, was as French as Henry was. And it wasn't built to repel the French, it was built to welcome them.
If you want us to investigate more sites, you can make it happen. So, help us reach 10,000 members on Patreon.
Dover Castle, built in the 1180s by Henry II, King of England. English Heritage are spending £2.5 million on it, trying to get it looking like it did when it was built. At the time, it was the best money could buy. And as the best, it cost a fortune.
It was a massive spend. We think about £6,000 in the period 1179 to 1189. Now, £6,000 doesn't sound a lot to us today. Trying to put that into contemporary context, it's like spending on the Olympics. It's a massive, massive deal.
What you often see in modern castles is you see the bare bones that have been left. You see the stone, you see something rather bleak. The windows, traceries have often gone. What you don't see, of course, is the hangings, the tables, the gold ornaments, the lights, the candles, the coverings, the rest of it. You don't smell the food. You don't hear the music. This is what would have been the effect if you were actually in those places when they were functioning as courtly centres. It must have been a complete riot of the senses. It must have been.
Second-guessing what might have been here 800 years ago has been an exhaustive and an exhausting process. But the team of historians have worked out what might have been in here.
One of the problems is that the evidence is patchy. So we've had to look at every item individually and take it apart and see what evidence survives. So we used the actual survival of objects. We looked at manuscripts that were written at the time, illuminated manuscripts. We looked at surviving pieces of fabric. We looked at wall paintings that survive in churches mainly, both in England and on the continent. So we were able to get into the feel of the period in terms of how much decoration there was, how colourful it was.
They were kind of theatres for aristocratic and royal life, beautifully arrayed with soft, bright furnishings, gold and silver, sparkling lights. They would have been a spectacular scene in which courtly life could unfold.
But they're not now. They're big, empty spaces. Just perfect for a theatre designer like Kit to work with.
So you can imagine what they got up to there when the mead was flowing and the fires were burning.
So you start off by drawing the room as it is now, then what happens?
And strip the room out while I'm drawing.
Yeah.
So I wind up with this empty space, which is, if you like a theatre. It's an empty stage. And then began to populate it, if you like, with my very first ideas. And then from that, after discussion about colour, because each room has a slightly different colour, I arrived at this drawing. And the same principle applies to all the other great chambers. This is the King's Chamber, which is adjacent to that first one. So here's the stripped-out version. Given these spaces that we've got, these magnificent spaces in the Great Tower, how can we best represent them to the public in a sort of exciting and dramatic way, really, rather than just a sort of museum? This is trying to recreate a whole experience of what that place might well have been like.
I don't want to talk about him as though he's not here,
Right.
but he's a theatre designer.
Yeah.
He's not a historian. How's it going to work?
Well, over to Kit, really. I mean, what we're trying to do is to deliver to Kit the historical research. What was the context for the building of Dover Castle in political terms? What did they wear? What were the ceremonies like? What was the music like? So we have a barrage of information, of commissioned reports from leading people.
I mean, it's been a very collaborative experience that I can come up with some ideas and Paul quite rightly says, I don't think it would have been like that. Our research shows this, and I go away and think, OK, maybe, but maybe we could try this. What do you think? Do you think that's authentic? Is that accurate? So it's been a wonderful sort of give and take.
The castle at Dover is a big, solid building with an imposing presence, which looks to us like a typically English castle. And so it is now. But the design of castles like this originated in France, like its first owner, Henry II, who was himself French. Now, it may come as a bit of a surprise to some people that the King of England was French, but remember, this is less than 100 years after 1066, when we'd been conquered by the Norman King William. Our King Henry was French, he lived in France. In fact, he lived in this beautiful great castle at Chinon. And at the time, there was nothing unusual about any of that.
Ever since 1066, the King of England had also been a ruler of a chunk of France. By Henry's time, he ruled far more of France than the King of France did. So Henry, when he spends time in France, it's not like he's going abroad. He was born there, his wife is from there, that's his home in a sense. It's more that England is the extra, the visit abroad.
This is Chinon, in the Loire Valley in France, where Henry spent most of his time. He lived in this chateau. For 5 years at the end of the 1150s, Henry didn't even bother travelling to England, even though he had just become king. We tend to think of massive stone keeps as peculiarly English, don't we? They're dotted all over our landscape. Think of Newcastle and Rochester and, of course, Dover too. But they're not. They started off life in France. This is the Château de Loches in the Loire Valley. That was put up in the 11th century. That's 100 years before Dover Castle. See the big castle walls snaking all the way around and that enormous keep in the middle. There are buildings like that all over France. And we've got William the Conqueror to thank for the fact that we've got them in England too. William built this place, the Great Keep of the Tower of London. Built in the 1080s, 100 years before Dover. It was the first big keep built in the country. Huge and square, it's what we think of as a traditional Norman castle. There's another one just like it in Rochester, on the road to Dover, built slightly later. And there used to be one in Canterbury too. Dover, when built, completed the lineup, a string of castles between London and the coast.
For anybody travelling that route to the capital of the English kingdom, those towers have a message. They're staking out and symbolising this arterial road that is connecting the capital with the world beyond. Dover is a linchpin in a kingdom, in an empire. It's looking beyond. It's securing a connection. And that's a really important point to understand about it.
And that connection is with Henry's power base. Dover linked his kingdom in England with his territories in France. Dover Castle wasn't on the edge of Henry's world, it was at the centre of it. In France, he controlled Normandy, Anjou and Brittany. Through his wife Eleanor, he also controlled Aquitaine, plus England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. Henry II was one of the most powerful kings ever to rule here.
So he's ruling a mixture of territories that run from the north of Britain down to the borders of Spain. So he's clearly, in territorial terms, he's one of the most important rulers of his day.
There's a little drawing of Henry in a 12th century manuscript which shows him sitting like this, looking straight out. And he's got a crown on, staring everybody straight in the face. Now, this is not a formal portrait. This is a little drawing in a manuscript. But I think it indicates the way in which Henry looked. Powerful. Power would have radiated from every sinew of his being.
Henry's castles attest to his power and control over England. In the north, Newcastle stands firm, blocking approaches from the Scots. Across the country, he built many more. But none was as grand as Dover, and to reflect that grandeur, Dover would have been filled with nothing but the best. And now, 800 years later, English heritage are trying to fill Dover with objects that will do justice to the original palace. So at a reenactors' fair in Coventry, 2 members of the English heritage team are out shopping. This place is a godsend for them. It's like a huge shopping centre for anyone interested in buying medieval objects, although it's all newly made.
We need books.
We want 1170, 1180.
1180.
1170, 1180.
Everything needed to fill the castle has to be commissioned. Many people here have the appropriate skills, and the shopping list is huge.
Yes. We will need some rolls, but it will be books for nobles. And if we gave you the picture, you could produce something.
It won't be exactly the same. I'm not making replicas.
No.
I'm making
In the spirit of.
in the spirit of.
We've detailed every single object that you will see in the building.
We will definitely need some leather goods.
Every single pot, every single piece of painting is the product of research into life of the 12th century.
We need some helmets, we need some swords, shields. We need 2 very good shields.
So although it's all modern and all reproduction, it's as authentic as we can make it, and hopefully it'll give people just a feel of what it might have been like.
In many cases, they're also designing the artefacts. They've scoured the country for traces of evidence as to what things look like. In Durham Cathedral, there are magnificent drawings on the walls, as there are too in Canterbury, giving the historians some inspiration.
It's a perfect model for some of the things that we have planned in the Great Tower, in terms of the style of the artistic style of production. For colour, you can see it's so fresh still, with the beautiful blues and reds surviving. But also we have a lot of life happening here in the faces, in the clothes, in the action, in the style of the buildings. Everything is really good to use as a source for what we're going to be doing in the castle.
And you've got quite a lot of information with things like the bed and the chair there.
Yeah, the way things are depicted here are going to help us immensely. So, for instance, the chair with its turned legs and the fretwork on the sides where the wood appears to have been pierced to form arches. I mean, that's really good detail that we can use and give to a furniture maker to reproduce it. We're going to take what we see here and in other places where 12th century wall paintings survive and try and get an artist to work in that style.
And this is an example of how that works. The Norman conquest as drawn by Kit and as designed by him.
This isn't a frieze that actually exists. You've created that in order to tell the story. You must have enjoyed that.
Enormously, absolutely enormously.
Tell me the story.
It's the beginning, the decision to invade England.
What are these guys doing here?
They're chopping down trees to build the ships.
Of course, yes.
So here we are with shipbuilding going on. The boats being loaded with the horses and with the soldiers, and here's the foot soldiers.
And the disembarking.
And then the disembarking.
There was a moment, wasn't there, when you first showed me that wall painting of the Battle of Hastings.
Yes.
And we knew we'd arrived in the 12th century.
You just went, that's it. I feel I'm in the 12th century.
Yeah.
So this is just before the eve of the battle, if you like, and there's the English feasting and getting drunk.
That's outrageous. Poor old Harold was on a forced march down from Stamford Bridge.
And the French, of course, being very pious and getting blessed. Then the melee of the battle.
Oh, that's beautiful.
The tumbling horses and falling. The triumphant French chasing the English away, and the founding of Dover Castle.
Decorated wall hangings like these were very popular in the 12th century. Most of them told stories, usually based on religious scenes or tales from history, often distorted for propaganda.
Henry had a very keen sense of history and of his own place in that history. Although his father was only a count, the Count of Anjou here in the Loire Valley, his grandfather was Henry I of England, and his grandfather was William the Conqueror.
The sense of history was very important to Henry. The one form of literature that we know was patronised at Henry's court is the writing of history. I think he saw himself as the direct successor to Charlemagne, as a direct successor to Arthur, to these extraordinary kings of antiquity whose real lives had been totally mythologized.
What this hints at is that Henry II was consciously building a building that fitted into a tradition of architecture. He wasn't just trying to build some dazzling new work of architecture. He wanted to build a building that was quite self-evidently part of a long tradition of building that stretched back to the distant historic past.
The exterior of Dover Castle reflects that past. It was the last great keep to be built in the country. It harked back not just to the Tower of London, but also to places like Loches in France. And now Dover needs to be filled with artefacts that reflect Henry's power and majesty. This is one of the last craftsmen in Britain who makes medieval lanterns out of bronze. There are very few people left with skills like this. In this furniture firm on the edge of Rugby, they still make furniture for the royal family. Right now, they're concentrating on tables and chairs for a much earlier monarch, Henry II, including the throne. And this throne mirrors that which we saw on the wall painting in Canterbury.
I don't think at any one moment I thought, I don't quite know who I'm dealing with. You know, this is a powerful, oversexed, possibly, certainly arrogant, dominating man, ruling vast amounts of this country, vast amounts of France. I think, you know, I was getting a little hint of what he might be like.
So when you're designing this stuff, there's a little bit of you that's being that
Possibly.
domineering man.
Now, if I was sitting here, what would I see? Yes, that's good. Or if I walked in here, what would I want people... How would I like people to view me sitting in my throne?
Yeah.
You know, bang, yes.
Well, the huge advantage that we have here, of course, is that this is supposed to be royal apartments. Kings were great show-offs, and Henry II obviously wanted to impress people who came to Dover. So they would have had the best of everything anywhere. So we already have a head start on the theatrical side, and we can afford to be bold, and we can afford to be flamboyant, because it would have been.
Dover Castle is bold. It sits above the white cliffs, defying anyone to attack. No one even tried, though, for 35 years after it was built. But then, this castle wasn't built for warfare. Dover was built as a palace, a big, shiny place to impress and entertain.
So together we brought Time Team back, and now we're going to take Time Team to the next level. Help us achieve 10,000 ongoing members on Patreon.
A blacksmith is making metalwork for Dover Castle. He could easily be working in the 12th century. Little has changed. And everything he's making is just as real as it would have been 800 years ago. These coins are as authentic as you can get. They're not legal tender today, of course, but are made exactly as they would have been. Same thing with this sword, with the shields and the crossbows. Everything is new, just as it would have been over 800 years ago. In a house in Warwickshire, Phil and Tamara Pleasant are hard at work on a 12th century map of the world. This is being painted onto vellum, one of the largest vellum skins in the country. And they're using proper traditional paints and techniques. This is real gold. This is a mappa mundi, not just a map of the world, but also a sort of medieval encyclopedia of knowledge and history. English Heritage have commissioned this one for Dover Castle.
There was a tradition in England of making these circular maps of the world, of how they understood it. And the funny thing is that as time went on, from the 10th century, 11th, 12th, 13th, the maps became less and less accurate. Because they are probably based on a lost Roman original. So we've chosen the only known 12th century English map, which is called the Sawley map, which is quite small, the scale of a page, and we have recreated the lost original of the Sawley map, which is what you see here. I like the way you've got the major points down the middle of it that bit bigger. Paradise to the Tower of Babel and Babylon, that's the Old Testament, to Jerusalem, which represents the life of Christ, to Rome, which represents modern history, in effect, to the Pillars of Hercules. The pictorial content is great because people can't read Latin, but they can work out that that's Adam and Eve at the top. And that's the expulsion from Eden with the angel with the fiery sword. And it tells lots of stories in one.
This is the world of the 12th century. But the world in which Henry II lived every day was getting increasingly fraught.
No one! Richard will have her when
Henry was at war with almost everyone, including his family.
not be pushed by Pope, King, my wife, no, nor by my own children.
At a studio in London, Henry's being filmed. This footage will end up being shown in Dover Castle as a form of Pepper's ghost. The image will float in space, adding to the magic of the place. Henry was a troubled man. Henry's rule was peppered with trouble. Trouble with his family, trouble with the other rulers in Europe. But he did tend to land himself in hot water. And the big turning point in his life came because of his long-standing argument with the church. It caused Thomas Becket, his former chancellor, to flee here to France. Thomas Becket is one of the most famous names in English history, and his murder was one of the most shocking events in the medieval world. Becket was Henry's Chancellor, the most important job in the country next to that of the King. He and Henry were close, but as Chancellor he did Henry's bidding. But then Henry also made him Archbishop of Canterbury. Henry thought that would give him more power as king over the church, but it didn't.
His plan is for Becket to be Chancellor and Archbishop of Canterbury. So the man who is the head of the royal government is also going to be the head of the English church. And for Henry II, this is fine. There's no why not? It's what they do in Germany at exactly the same time, so it's not impossible to imagine. And when he's appointed Archbishop, Becket suddenly undergoes a transformation. And very, very quickly, it's a matter of less than a year, you go from his elevation to this position of Archbishop of Canterbury by King Henry to the beginnings of the clash between them, which was eventually to lead to his murder.
His problem with Becket was that Becket said no, and really until 1163-4, which is when it happened, nobody had dared to say no. Tom Becket, a merchant's son, not even a noble, not even a knight, stood up and challenged the King of England and the Lord of what we call the Angevin Empire. Astonishing.
And it all ended in tears. Becket refused to agree to state control of the laws of the church. Henry grew more frustrated and exasperated, and is thought to have uttered the words, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" It was something he would live to regret. Four of his knights took him at his word. In December 1170, they came to Canterbury Cathedral and murdered him right here.
It was shocking. 4 barons, now fully armed, came upon him and they cut him down in cold blood, concentrating on his head. And then when he was on the ground, one of them came and actually sliced off the crown of his head. And then a 4th person came along and scraped out his brains and scattered them on the pavement. It was a bloody and brutal murder.
It's very difficult to think of another occasion until perhaps some episodes in 20th century Latin America where an archbishop is murdered in his own cathedral on the orders of the head of state. It's undoubtedly the most shocking, most notorious murder in the whole of medieval European history.
The bloody murder of Thomas Becket in the cathedral at Canterbury was to have enormous consequences.
He was immediately viewed as a martyr. People came and took bits of his blood, they collected it and put it in water and gave it to sick people and it cured them. After that, his cult, his shrine, becomes one of the most important pilgrimage centres in Europe, and it draws people from all over.
Henry was seen as the bad guy. He was stunned, and it gave his enemies an excuse to turn the heat up.
3 years after Becket's murder, in 1173, there broke out an enormous rebellion which involved the whole of England and nearly all of continental Europe. It also involved the King of France, the King of Scotland, 4 English earls, 3 of the King's own sons, and Queen Eleanor. A very large number of powerful and influential people rose against him. Chroniclers at the time said it was God's punishment for his murder of Becket.
Under attack from all sides, Henry had to do something, so he made a bold decision. He decided to ask for help from Becket. He walked barefoot to Canterbury. He allowed himself to be flogged by all 70 monks of the cathedral priory, then spent the night in prayer at Becket's tomb.
The next morning, he hears the news that at the same hour that he had heard Mass at Becket's tomb, King William of Scotland has been captured at Alnwick during one of his invasions of the north. And we know that Henry thought that this showed that Becket had interceded with God, and God was now on Henry's side again.
In death, Becket had made up with Henry.
And that act from beyond the grave was to indirectly lead to the building of the Great Tower at Dover. In Dover, the building work is coming to an end. Everyone is reaching the final stages.
What we'll do is we'll gild the head solidly. This is obviously going to be picked out.
What's finished is spectacular. Every single link in this chainmail was made by hand, 40,000 of them.
Absolutely perfect. Crikey.
Everything has to be fit for a king.
So we've got gold plating in the rivets?
Everything gold plated.
All of this is gold plated? Yes. Yeah? Just amazing. This is kind of Henry, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is him. The last time I saw this was as a drawing. Yeah. And now it's here. It's a lovely blade.
Quite polished.
Yeah. Henry's lion. And then a Latin inscription. Henry, King of England.
King of England, yeah.
The Royal School of Needlework is working flat out. The artwork is all being done in the style of the period. The painting of the Norman conquest is now finished, awaiting delivery to the castle. Some of the work, though, does look a bit garish to us now. It'll be hard for us to grasp with our modern ideas of aesthetics, but the historians have done their homework.
There is nothing in this country from the late 12th century which has paint on it. Unfortunately, we came across a few bits in Northern Europe and Southern Scandinavia, and it turns out that they are gloriously technicolor. We had a couple of instances of a Madonna and Child sitting in a turned chair, just like the ones we want to make. And it had this lovely 2-colour or 3-colour banded decoration. Exactly the thing that we needed to design our chairs. The colours are so bright. They're more like what we think of as kindergarten cardinal colours. So it's going to be a bit of a shock to people when they see them first. But that's how it was. We have to go for it. There's no half measures.
This is the visual and sensory world that they thought was their due. We have an account of Thomas Becket on an embassy to Paris with the carts and the horses and the pet monkeys and the trumpeters and the soldiers. Yeah? These are not people who think that modesty is a virtue. They want to make a splash. That's what they do.
The death of Thomas Becket certainly made a splash. His bloody murder at Canterbury Cathedral turned Canterbury into one of the most important pilgrimage sites in Europe. In 1173, after Henry made his own pilgrimage there and made peace with Becket, it really took off. More visitors came, and the quality of visitor went up. In 1177, Count Philip of Flanders arrived.
And in 1179, King Louis VII of France himself came because his young heir, Philip, aged 15, the sole heir to the Capetian crown, was gravely ill. And King Louis, in his desperation, quite suddenly, at the drop of a hat, crossed the Channel with most of his royal household, and all of a sudden he's in England with no warning. It was the first ever state visit in English history, and it caught King Henry completely unawares.
King Louis VII of France was in England with his enormous entourage. This was an extraordinary moment, unprecedented.
It's the first time that a ruling king of France had left his territory to do pilgrimage to an English shrine.
It would be like when Barack Obama turns up or something like that. The security has to be right, everything has to be right, the entertainment has to be right. It's your moment to show that you are a king on a world stage.
But it wasn't right. Things weren't as they should have been. The King of France and the King of England met here on the beach at Dover. There was nowhere to entertain the French king, nowhere for him to stay. Henry was embarrassed.
You suddenly need something very grand where you can entertain, if that's the word, your rivals as they come to visit, because it seems to me that that's really what the Great Keep at Dover is for. It's a huge status symbol.
Didn't reflect well, I think, upon a King of England or any prince, that when distinguished visitors came, they had to, as it were, camp in the back garden. And so Henry goes for this magnificent new build at Dover.
So Henry II built Dover Castle. Embarrassed? With nowhere to entertain important foreign visitors, he realised that he needed something at Dover, and it had to be somewhere that would really impress them with his wealth. So this is what he built. In its day, this was the greatest castle in Europe. And now it's on its way back to being like that again. 2 years of research and hard graft by around 250 people is almost over. They're gearing up for the castle to reopen its doors to the public.
It's been extraordinary seeing these things all coming together. Every day there's a little bit of something else coming in that you remember doing a drawing of 6 months ago, 9 months ago. It goes into the keep, into the right room, and gets put up, and it's another little tick, another little piece of the jigsaw puzzle, really. We've just been hanging the King's backing, which has been made by the Royal School of Needlework, and it's magnificent work. It's breathtaking. And you never know until you see them. Is it the right scale? Are they big enough? These are very large rooms, you know. And a lot of the time people have been saying, that's an enormous banner, that's far too big. And I say, no, trust me, it needs to be that big in these spaces.
And the reality of what they've all done is about to be revealed. 830 years after first being built, Dover Castle is almost restored to its original glory.
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon. Your ongoing membership enables us to develop more sites and more episodes.
The keep at Dover is now finished, and Henry is back.
Go and inform the constables and the household knights of mine will. We ride on the morn with Flanders.
At least in the form of a hologramic image. The refit is complete.
It's one of the greatest castles built in England in the Middle Ages. For those small number who are taken up the staircases into the grand chambers, it shouts the grandeur and wealth of the King of England.
When we think about how much money King Henry II is known to have spent on Dover Castle, 4 times as much as he spent on the great palace castle centres of Winchester and Windsor, it's clear that he reckoned he was building something absolutely fantastic.
He did build something fantastic, but up until recently, this is what it looked like. This is what we see in our minds when we think of what a medieval castle looks like. The refit at Dover will change all that.
It's practically a year since we walked down these steps together, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. Here we are, in the King's Hall.
I love that red. That is so good. Do you know what I thought? I thought I would walk in here and I was going to be really embarrassed because I wouldn't like it. But actually, it's a fantastic environment.
Next door, the change is more dramatic.
Oh, this has got a completely different feel about it, hasn't it? Extraordinary. Really does feel like the place where one person lives. And it's so much more cluttered. You've got all the books out and the chess set with the game going and some writing and the musical instrument. You've even got someone's clothes still laid out. Very, very, very different. All this colour. Look at this here. That is rather good, isn't it?
It's fantastic, isn't it?
You know what I realise about this great whirl of almost primary colours, that under natural light, would just look like a bunch of kids' toys
Sure.
is that when you bring them into a much more muted room, they acquire completely different characteristics, don't they? Yeah. They become much more dramatic, they become much more charged, and it takes the edge off them. So it doesn't feel like you're in a fairground anymore. It feels quite sexy, actually.
Fantastic.
The team behind all this have tried to work out what Henry would have wanted to be surrounded with. They've married meticulous research with a sense of theatre. And I think they've got it just about right.
I love this. So much detail. Who are these kings?
These are some of the kings of Judah or Israel. We have Solomon at the top and David on the left-hand side there. Biblical subjects were, of course, very popular, even in a private chamber such as this, not just in churches. And of course, these are virtuous people from the Bible, kings whom Henry would want to be associated with because of the good things that they did.
And what about this frieze around the top?
This is something called the Psychomachia, which is an early medieval story of the struggle for the eternal soul between virtue and vice. So, for instance, here we have patience and anger, and then humility and pride. It's just giving you a picture of the virtues and the vices and the eternal struggle.
You know what the design team have done here? When I first came here, this was just a big, gloomy stone hall. But now it's someone's room, and I think that's really clever.
Yeah.
There isn't really anywhere where you can appreciate what a great 12th century interior was like. We believe that what we've done here is something close, something like what King Henry would have had around him. The fact that he spends so much money here, even though he was never going to use it as a regular residence, tells us that asserting kingship and asserting his authority here must really have been quite important to him.
Look at this.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Oh.
Yeah. That's pure silk.
Oh, I wouldn't mind that on my sofa.
Dover Castle speaks to Henry II as an imperial ruler. This is an imperial ruler, an emperor who looks back to Roman antiquity. Dover speaks to Henry II's relationship with Canterbury. It's on the direct route to Canterbury for all these pilgrims coming from the continent, and therefore speaks to Henry II's relationship with God, mediated through Thomas Becket, the great Canterbury saint.
Everything in here is designed with a king in mind. There's no doubt this is a royal palace as much as a castle. And it makes a very big statement.
Don't try it on with me. This is a very powerful king and a very wealthy kingdom. To build something like that, you had to be very wealthy. To have something like that, you were very powerful.
After 10 years of fantastic expenditure on Dover, Henry II created what was clearly the greatest castle in Western Europe at the time.
Henry II spent a fortune building this castle. He built it because he was embarrassed, and he built it to show off in. 800 years ago, most of us would never have had the chance to see inside. Now we can. And medieval castles will never look the same to us again. Dover once more looks like a castle fit for a king. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.